Okay, let's dive right into this explainer by tackling one of the most famous and, honestly, most widely misunderstood concepts in all of biology. I'm talking about an idea that's been confusing people ever since Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species way back in 1859. Darwin laid out the whole theory of evolution by natural selection, how organisms change over these vast stretches of time to fit their environment. But even a century and a half later, there's still this massive misconception hanging over our very own origin story.
And that misconception usually sounds a little something like this. Did humans evolve from apes? I mean, people ask this literally all of the time. But here's the thing. The very premise of that question is fundamentally flawed. If you look at the science, the truth is that we didn't evolve from apes. We actually belong to the ape family right now. That's right, we're sitting right there on the family tree alongside orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and a whole bunch of other subspecies. We literally make up the modern ape family together.
So, the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that we did not evolve from today's chimps or gorillas. Instead, and this is where it gets really cool, if you wind the evolutionary clock back about 17 million years, every single species in the ape family shared a single common ape-like ancestor living over in Africa. You can kind of think of this common ancestor as the great-great-great-grandparent of us all. As time went on, this one single species began to branch out. First, it split away from the ancestors of gibbons, then orangutans, and eventually gorillas.
It's just an incredibly tight family tree. I mean, when we look at our DNA today, we share almost 99% of our genetic sequence with chimpanzees. 99%. They are our closest living genetic cousins, hands down. And we know this for sure not just by looking at genetics, but thanks to thousands of fossil records that perfectly chronicle every little progression and split from that ancient common ancestor.
Which brings us to our next chapter, the shift to two legs.
Now, even though we share that massive chunk of DNA, we obviously look and act completely differently from our cousins out in the wild. After that initial 17 million year milestone we just talked about, a totally critical divergence happened about 7 million years ago. One group went off to eventually become the ancestors of modern-day chimpanzees and bonobos. But the other group, well, they started doing something entirely unprecedented. They literally stood up.
They became bipedal. And this shift to walking on two legs wasn't just some random stylistic choice. It was driven by intense, do-or-die environmental pressure. Millions of years ago, the super-dense African rainforests that these ancestors called home were rapidly disappearing because of natural climate change. The whole planet was growing cooler and drier. Suddenly, they found themselves out on the wide-open African savanna. With hardly any trees left to climb for safety, walking upright on two legs became the ultimate survival hack. It let them evade predators and cover super long distances way more efficiently.
By the time we hit about 4 million years ago, a species known as Australopithecus was regularly walking upright. You've probably heard of the most famous fossil from this group, Lucy, who was discovered back in 1974. Actually, fun little side note about her name, she was named after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, because it just happened to be blasting on the radio at the dig site. But here's the catch with Lucy and her kind. Even though early bipedal ancestors walked a bit like us, they still weren't very human-like yet. They had pretty small brains, they were mostly herbivores, and they definitely couldn't speak.
Moving right along to part 2, handymen and fire builders.
You see, evolution is just this relentless process. Things are constantly changing, adapting, and refining. So around 2.5 million years ago, we see this massive leap in our direct family line. Enter Homo habilis. These guys are a huge deal because they're regarded as the very first members of the Homo family. Yep, the exact same family that we, Homo sapiens, belong to. Their name literally translates to handyman. And the reason why is pretty amazing. With smaller teeth, smaller jaws, noticeably larger brains, and uniquely human-like hands, they did something no ancestor had ever pulled off before. They crafted tools. And that incredible milestone completely set the stage for an even more advanced species to step onto the scene about 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus.
Now, Homo erectus was a total game changer. They had skeletons perfectly adapted for full-time walking, and they were the very first to boldly migrate out of Africa, spreading all the way into Southeast and East Asia. But their absolute biggest achievement? They unlocked a very specific, magical chain reaction. They intentionally harnessed fire. Fire meant they could finally cook their food. Cooking food breaks it down, which unlocks far more calories. And all those extra easily accessible calories, they provided the immense raw energy needed to fuel massive brain growth over the next million years. They literally built the large, complex brains that you and I are using to process this explainer right now.
Let's jump into part 3, our ancient genetic cousins.
Okay, so this era honestly feels like something straight out of a sci-fi or fantasy novel. We're talking about a time when the Earth was shared by multiple, highly advanced humanoid species living at the exact same time. Over hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors had split off into distinct groups. By the time our direct precursors, Homo sapiens, fully evolved in Africa around 130,000 years ago, our cousins, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, had already spread way across Europe and Asia. We were quite literally sharing the planet for thousands of years. But then, around 40,000 years ago, there's this massive shift in the fossil record. Those other groups just begin to vanish, leaving only us.
But when we actually compare Homo sapiens to Neanderthals side by side, it becomes super clear that they were not the loutish, grunting cavemen you see in the movies. Not at all. They buried their dead, they created highly complex tools, and they likely even had spoken language. They were really just shorter and stockier, which made them perfectly adapted to the bitter cold of northern weather. So why did we survive? Well, during a period of rapid, totally unforgiving climate fluctuations, Homo sapiens just had a crucial advantage. We had spent our time in Africa building up larger populations and forming really complex social groups. We shared knowledge rapidly, we developed intricate art and better tools. It was this behavioral edge, our sprawling, interconnected social networks, that gave us the ultimate competitive advantage when we eventually moved into their territories.
Which leads us to our final section, ghosts in our DNA.
So, what exactly happened when humans expanded into Neanderthal territory and outcompeted them to extinction 40,000 years ago? Did they just quietly fade away into the freezing climate? Well, the answer brings this incredible twist to our evolutionary mystery. We didn't just replace them. The story is actually way more intimate than a simple tale of one species wiping out another. Because before they disappeared from the physical world, we actually interbred with them.
Modern genetic studies have dropped an absolute bombshell on how we view human history. They revealed that about 4% of the DNA in many modern humans alive today comes directly from Neanderthals, Denisovans, or even other humanoid species we haven't fully identified yet. Let that sink in. They literally live on within us.
As we continue to piece together this giant puzzle of our 17-million-year-old family tree, with new archaeological digs and genetic discoveries happening practically every day, it leaves us with this stunning final thought. For a lot of humans today, these ancient cousins weren't just random groups that existed alongside our ancestors, they are our ancestors. And as we think about those hairless apes who bravely climbed down from the disappearing trees millions of years ago, we have to ask ourselves, if the relatives we outcompeted are still shaping our biology today, did they ever truly go extinct?